Hello, good afternoon and welcome to Tech Tuesday, 7th of December 2021. Welcome to today's Tech Tuesday, and for those of you joining us for the first time, or if you're regular joiners of these virtual sessions we've been delivering for all of 2021. Today, we scheduled to run for 60 minutes maximum, and we'll be hearing from 3 technology leaders from strategic economic sectors, which include telecoms, digitisation, manufacturing and low carbon networks. We'll have an open Q&A as usual. Please use the chat channel to position questions for any of our speakers, which we'll select to ask the panel after the final presentation today. We make no apologies whatsoever in delivering these thought-provoking sessions because the combination, breadth and perspective from all 3 keynotes will provide an insight to the direction and opportunities being created for future technology adoption. We'll also learn how investment funding is evolving alongside global technology growth. So for today's Tech Tuesday topic, we wanted to deliver views on the trajectory of global technology markets and what 2026 and beyond would look like. We read many dramatic headlines on phenomenal early investment rounds for unproven emerging technologies, where values are based on colossal scale potential. The new data economy and its future value drives the high risk for high reward metric on higher and higher seed round values. In 2022, the COVID pandemic will continue to impact our lives in many ways. This means that we will continue to see an accelerated rate of digitization and virtualization of business and society. However, as we move into a new year, the need for sustainability, ever-increasing data volumes and increasing compute and network speeds, these will begin to regain their status as the most important drivers of digital transformation. Smart really used to mean connected smartphones, smart TVs, and the plethora of other smart devices were really just the same old toys, but connected to the internet. Today, smart increasingly means powered by artificial intelligence, generally machine learning algorithms and capable of helping us in increasingly innovative ways. Smart cars use facial recognition algorithms to detect whether we're paying attention to the road and alert us if we're getting tired. Smartphones use AI to do everything from maintain call quality to help us take better pictures, and of course they're packed with apps that use AI to help us do just about anything. I'm delighted to open today's Tech Tuesday theme, Global Technologies, the Next 5 Years, by introducing Mark Stansfeld, Chair of West Midlands 5G and Worcestershire Local Enterprise Partnership, to name a few of his directorships. As co-founder and former chairman of giffgaff, Mark has 30 plus years experience in the telco sector. Welcome, and Mark, over to you to set the scene for our Global Tech, the Next 5 Years talk today.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much indeed. And can I just say congratulations on the work you're doing at B2Den. It's great that what you're doing there, and very informative. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks for the introduction. Yes, I am old, and it makes me feel old. I'm in awe actually of the subject I'm talking about, the direction of global technology, and it just got me thinking. Number one, I struggle to know what I'm actually doing at the weekend, let alone in 5 years' time. Second thing is it would be very arrogant for me to be able to predict exactly what is going to be happening, so that won't be the case. And thirdly, as well, if I was able to do it, I'd probably sit in the Caribbean somewhere on my boat. So, but it did get me thinking about what needs to happen to actually make some of the technologies take off. Because it's not just as simple about a development for technology will mean that it's going to be a success. There are lots of great ideas around the world, but it doesn't mean they will necessarily happen. You just mentioned about data. In the mobile industry, that was a great example where we had in mid-1990s that data consumption would drive forward at an exponential rate, but it never did. And we simply, with the analysts, kept on actually moving the dates on the chart further along to say that it would happen the next year, and it didn't. It just didn't happen. And it came down to the very simple fact that the planets weren't lined up. The ecosystem wasn't right. And this is critical when it comes to any of the technologies. It wasn't until we were having discussions with Steve Jobs and Tim Cook, that they showed us the iPhone, and it was that was the enabler that made things happen. And they were the things that lined the planet up, because they had a phone that was a great customer experience, that also had the applications and the data to make it happen. So the requirement to have these enablers in place is critical within this global technology marketplace. And I think that is a critical thing that we need to do. And enablers, we've seen it as well with not only the digital requirements in terms of actually the network and the, and the rollout of the UK across fibre and the needs around that, but also government policy is enabler as well. So they can actually drive many of the things, and we'll come on and talk about the whole sustainable agenda going forward. But it did actually make me thinking as well is, it's a bit like an onion. You have a technology at the start, but you need to make sure that you have got a need in place, that it's solving a problem that people want that problem actually solved. You need to make sure you have the enablers in place, you can actually roll it out and make it happen. And then the next thing you do is you need to make sure as well that that need can be done at scale. And at West Midlands 5G, we're looking at the areas around the driving out of 5G at scale. And it is only at that level that you can start to drive awareness. And awareness is a critical thing going forward. And we've identified that if you drive things at scale and you get a credibility, you can start to make things happen. So we're driving things on some of the critical areas around health, around transport, and around the areas of manufacturing as well, which are critical as well. So you need to understand what you're doing and taking forward. And the final thing I think that is critical at the moment is, and we're going to talk about it more in a minute or two, is it has to be actually part of that sustainability. Too often now is that the days of actually just rolling stuff out and not addressing that issue have long gone. And so it needs to actually be green, and it needs to make things happen and move things forward. So those are the requirements to actually drive technologies forward. And when you look to the future, what are the critical areas that we think we're going to be finding in terms of the areas? Well, at West Midlands 5G, we're finding out that they're all the things that we know, and as part of that everybody's investing at the moment, and it is about following the money. So the key things that we're seeing is a whole, we can all rattle them off. AI, IoT. IoT is an interesting one that I think is going to see exponential growth in that, but it does need the enable of a digital connectivity be there to make it happen, although you can use private networks. But that is something that I think can actually change things dramatically. Some of the cloud-based areas, again, are moving forward at an exponential rate, as well as some of the autonomous stuff in terms of robotics as well that we're seeing, particularly manufacturing and moving stuff forward in that area. Some of the trials that we've done around AI and VR are proving particularly helpful. And when you start to look at the sectors, particularly in the health area, I come back to my planets lining up, areas and sectors that would naturally embrace technology, suddenly because of COVID-19, have actually said they can do things in a different way. So we're seeing people now begin to say, hold on a minute, yes, we would like to use that. So we've now got doctors and GPs and consultants using some of the augmented reality and the VR stuff, because they can see that it can actually offer a level of service better that they wouldn't have been able to do in the past. So I think that's a critical area. So just summarising before we move on to some of the key things that Jonathan and Carl are going to be talking about, for me, it's very much about understanding about what's the problem you're trying to solve, what are the digital enablers that you need in place to make these things happen. We mustn't forget then about two other things. One, it's about raising the awareness and driving things at scale. And the final one is, well, we have a huge skills gap at the moment. So how can we actually begin to take that forward? So exciting times, but we do need to move forward. So I'd like to hand over now to Jonathan, who will take us on to the next subject. Jonathan.
Thanks, Mark. Who perfectly sets up what I wanted to talk about, actually. Talking about problems and the needs is pretty much what I spend my day thinking about. So I'm a venture capital investor. I only focus on climate tech in the UK. I'm actually physically sat in Worcestershire at the moment. I live on the Malvern Hills and have been part of that kind of tech development from the early days of Kinetic and the science park as that grew out over a number of years. what I was going to talk about is a lot of what Mark kind of mentioned. Those enablers, for me, are a lot of what the kind of innovation of teams and founders and small technology companies are all about, and aligning that with big commercial problems, global problems that can take place. The slide that's just pinned up on the screen, that's a guy called John Doerr, another Silicon Valley person that Mark mentioned around Steve Jobs, etc. So he's famous for investing in Google and anything that's generated billions for investors. So back in 2007, he said about green technologies was going to be bigger than the internet. And I still believe that. And he said that in a famous TED talk. If you look at the next slide, what that shows in reality, what happened with that. Sorry, Dunstan, could you move on to the next slide, please? There we go. Yes, there was loads of investment going in that until about 2008-9. The last financial crisis saw pay to that in clean tech, and a lot of people lost a lot of capital and returns. And so venture capital in clean tech kind of got a dirty reputation, ironically, there. This is the question we keep saying, well, why is it different today? And I think a lot of what you mentioned, Mark, about this interconnectivity, the pervasiveness of data and how that's changing. I just wanted to talk about a few examples of things that we've invested in, the things that we're seeing, which are dependent on connectivity, the convergence of what had been hitherto absent in terms of different sectors. So if we can move to the next slide, please, Dunstan. So this is kind of the world that I live in, and it forms a lot of what our investment thesis is at the Clean Growth Fund. Is everything's going distributed, right? So this is more around power. So when we used to have central power stations, the transmission network, the national grid, going to substations, then onto homes and factories and things. That's changing to being much more localized. Even in Worcestershire, if you go on the train now, you can see local solar farms as you approach, or just coming outside Worcester, for example. Right? Those are distributed, they need to be optimized. And so the creations of microgrids where local communities generate, consume their own power and energy, store it, optimize it, and then decide how much gets fed to the grid is starting to happen. But again, it's dependent on data and machine learning and software to do that optimization. Everybody's aware of the cars going electric, but again, understanding traffic patterns, the prediction of pollution, the prediction of what the impact of charging cars at 6 p.m. when everyone comes home, what does that mean to the grid, and how do we avoid having to suddenly fire up gas-fired power stations to meet that demand? How do we better manage supply and demand, the things that we're looking at? Buildings as well. The UK's got some of their oldest housing stock in Northern Europe. On a day like today in this month where it's getting particularly cold, the average household will emit something around 2 tons of carbon dioxide a year just from heating. So how do we upgrade that housing stock, but do that in a way that builds intelligence into it and that allows other people to do it? And the same kind of applies to that whole industry going green. Probably less so on the data as one of the examples I'll show, but if we move to the next slide, if we quickly say what we do and why we think the time has come. I mean, Mark's talked already about the tech and the data being present, but consumer demand, government policy is there now, but there was a lack of investors in Europe, particularly the UK, who could come in at this early stage where people have got a great idea, they've had some Innovate UK grants or some early stage angel investors, may even have some early stage revenue, but we're positioned to come in and say, right, we'll take you to your first couple of million in revenue and then beyond, and bridge that funding gap that the UK has not had. If we move on to the next bit, so when we talk about clean tech, it covers multiple different sectors. So those 5 different areas there, from whether it's power, transport, waste, industry, buildings, is that onion that Mark kind of referenced. If you peel that back, they're usually underpinned by a handful of different technologies, and whether that's storage, things that separate data, the AI, biotech, or materials, they kind of converge. And these sectors, those 5 sectors, they're not a silo, they're interconnected, and there's a very clear digital vein that runs across all of those. And if we move on to the next slide, I just wanted to pick one of those sectors I'm not going to go into detail of what this means, but I think if you look at that top line of 1989, that was the power market, which I already referenced, about having these central power plants, the transmission, the distribution substations to homes, factories, etc. That was all largely state-owned, controlled. It was deregulated, and so we had with ballooning of all these companies. It was whether it's Bulb or Octopus, British Gas, deregulated, and competition law mandated who could own what and do what in that supply chain. In that second layer at the bottom, what you can see now is that active network management. They're starting to insert digital capability. So understanding what's happening at the grid level, what's happening with the weather prediction 24 hours ahead, what's the output of the offshore wind farms going to be, the solar. You've got to make use of renewable power when it's being generated. So if it's 3 o'clock in the morning and nobody wants the power to manufacture something or do anything in the home, it's got to be stored. It's pointless at the moment. What's tending to happen is National Grid will pay wind operators to turn turbines off rather than store it. So in driving and increase that problem there is how do we make better use of renewable power? So there's that layer of, can I predict from data of what the weather's going to be, the output of my renewable assets, how much do I store, versus then what's on the demand side. If you look at the bottom right of that is, I've got washing machines, compressors, electric vehicles, a whole shift in how assets are energized now and powered, shifting more into electrical load. Is when's peak going to be? What is the shape of peak tomorrow versus today? And data has to underpin that. And then we can make better use of storage technologies and batteries and vehicle to grid and the electric power piece. And so there's a layer of complexity which is starting to grow, starting to happen, and that just throws up, as complexity develops, a whole new plethora of different needs and problems that Mark mentioned that need to be solved by startup rich technology companies. So I was just going to skip through some of the examples that we had or have currently in our portfolio. So if you go next slide, please, Dunstan. So this example, it's a pure software company. And what Pickler does is find industrial companies who've got large power consuming assets, could be sawmills, could be people with big compressors, HVAC systems, and then aligns them on the other side with the people who own the substations of the power. And those people say, look, we know that when peak demand comes, if we haven't got the capacity, we've got a choice. We either have to invest millions in investing in upgrading the distribution network, the substations again, or I can go back to the market and say, can anybody cut us some slack for the next 45 minutes, turn down the compressors, turn off the sawmills for 20, 30 minutes, and we will pay you to do that, as opposed to reinvesting millions in just pushing ever more power and causing that supply and demand misbalance with renewables. And so this platform, it's pretty much got 100% market share in the UK now. The UK leads in this kind of auction mechanism where you're trading flexibility and power. And now that's expanding rapidly across the European continent and starting to encroach into North America. But again, purely a digital software layer that interfaces between old infrastructure that's on there. Next slide, please, Dunstan. This is a local company to Worcestershire. Some people may already know it. So Indra is probably the world's leading, and I certainly believe it is the world's leading electric vehicle charging company for this next generation of EV charging. So all the other existing EV chargers that are at people's homes, which have been put down in recent years, are completely dumb, unaware of the context of what's happening at the national grid, that the wind's not blowing, the sun isn't shining. And so if everybody plugs their cars in at 6 p.m., we're probably inadvertently causing a gas-fired power station to suddenly fire up to meet that demand. Whereas what Indra is able to do is to dock into that digital network and say, well, actually, I know the consumer wants the car ready for 7 o'clock in the morning and only needs to put 40 miles on. That's only 2 hours. So I've got to find a 2-hour window between 6 p.m. and 7 a.m. when the grid is at its lowest carbon intensity and probably from a price point the cheapest. So off the back of that, Indra is now the world's first electric vehicle charger that can pay consumers to charge their vehicle at home because they revenue share across understanding that data in the network. They're also the only company in the world to be certified by Nissan to turn the vehicle into a virtual power plant on your driveway. And so if you've harvested energy at 3 o'clock in the morning and paid 5 pence a unit, at 6 p.m. when your house is needed to be charged again, if it's going to cost you 30 pence, you're better off running the house off your car. And so their vehicle to grid charges it's commercially available. It's done the largest trials in the world of the tech, and now it's just starting to be deployed outside of the UK and its first commercial deployment. But again, it can't do this without this interconnection with data that Mark referenced. Next slide. Probably hot on your toes, Carl, is TEPIO. So I used to work at British Gas and Central for a number of years, and we're very aware of the pollution, the carbon dioxide that a gas-fired boiler will do. So this is a direct replacement for a standalone boiler that you'd have sitting at home in a kitchen somewhere. It literally pull the old one out, plumb this one. It's the same connections. You don't need to change the radiators. You don't need to change the plumbing like you do with many heat pumps. The only difference here, it's an electrical connection, not a gas connection. But it's got immense artificial intelligence and software sitting in that cloud. Again, it predicts and learns how much energy does a homeowner use on a Tuesday versus a Thursday, how much energy just it needs to store at 3 o'clock in the morning, and then push out as heat during the rest of the day to minimize what that requirement is going to be. If there's excess power at 3 o'clock in the morning, you can be paid to take and harvest that energy, store it, and make use of it at a later date. So going from two tons a year to 0 tons a year for heating homes. The last company I was giving an example of, because it's not so much digital, Dunstan, if you can move to the next and final slide. It's a recent investment we've done up in Manchester. If we look at the sort of supply chains, what's going, this is completely not analog tech. It's a biotechnology company. If you look at all the oils that McDonald's and restaurants use, is going to biodiesel. It ultimately gets burnt and there's CO2 produced. What this innovation will do is take sugar, take that used oil that's been cleaned up a little bit, a bit of yeast, and we can produce very high volumes of soaps, surfactants, which go into personal care and cosmetics, the laundry detergents, the hand washers, etc. We're all using lots of at the moment with COVID. But it's done in a carbon negative way because those oils are typically plant-based oils. So they've already taken and sequestered carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, converted it into a plant. This is a very, very low energy intensive process, non-energy intensive process, that then converts all those plants and sugars just using yeast into a soap at a price point which is below commodity prices for those petrochemical equivalents today. So what I was just trying to show is that there's some real big problems and challenges. Things aren't siloed anymore. They're heavily interconnected and dependent on existing industries. Data runs through a lot of these things, and without it, the intelligence can't be there for decisions to be made about EV charging, charging your home, when to invest more capex or offset capex, just by balancing power and supply and demand in a much better economic sense than we've done in the last sort of 10, 15 years. And with that, I'll stop and hand over to Carl, I believe.
I was going to say, if I could jump in there, if that's okay with everyone. Thank you very much, Jonathan. As I said, very interesting perspective there and some great examples. I think we're going to hear some interesting responses now from Carl Arntzen, particularly in relation to, should we say, Carl's topic and how really it is about a strategic technology shift at Worcester Bosch. So I think if we can tee up Carl's slides, please, Dunstan, if that's okay. And Carl, are you ready to go and take over your delivery? Thanks.
Yeah, will do. Thanks very much, Linda. And I wouldn't say I'm going to contradict Jonathan. I think we're going to be violently agreeing one or two areas. So hopefully so. So yes, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the technology shift towards decarbonising of heat, obviously, which is our main activity in the market today, but also what are the technologies or new business models that might emerge as we engineer that shift to a low or zero carbon future. So if you go to the next slide, please. So first of all, we've seen a lot in the news and the press recently, and of course with the COP26 conference in Glasgow, about the challenge of climate change and the how we decarbonise many aspects of our economy. And what we've seen over the last 12 to 18 months or so is a number of strategy documents from the government. The 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution that was launched back in November 2020. The hydrogen strategy document that was released earlier this year, and then the one closest to our hearts, the heat and building strategy, which was released in October of this year, literally 6 weeks or so ago. And there's lots of interesting, detailed information contained in those publications. And what I've tried to do is summarize it on one slide, which is the next slide, please. So lots and lots and lots of pages and details in those documents. But effectively, if you wanted to pull out 3 or 4 key highlights, the first element is the government have now an ambition to cease the sale of new natural gas boilers in 2035. And we are currently trialling with government various alternatives, particularly using hydrogen as the main fuel. And there is a consideration to come to a decision around the future of heating in the UK using hydrogen in 2026. That covers on gas grid or all the houses connected to the gas network, which is about 85–86% of the housing stock in the UK. If you then look at houses off the gas grid, we commonly use either oil or LPG heating technology. And there, as you can see, an aspiration to stop the sale of those type of boilers from 2026. So you can imagine from a Worcester Bosch point of view, this is all very interesting for us because the products and the technology we sell today are going to be banned for sale here in the UK over the next decade or so. So as you can imagine, that's taking a lot of our interest and thoughts at the moment. If you look at the bottom left-hand box, there's a lot of discussion around electrifying of heat. Jonathan was talking about the electric boiler, but he did also mention heat pumps, which is today one of the most common technologies deployed. And the government has an ambition to see 600,000 of those appliances installed each year in the UK by 2028. And then they are also consulting on a market mechanism to encourage the uptake of heat pumps. And that's something that was similarly done around the automotive industry to encourage a switch over to EVs. And we're consulting with the government on that. If you could go to the next slide, please, Dunstan. So what does all this mean in terms of the UK heating market? So this graph shows the left-hand column, 2020, is the proportion, the percentage of different heating technologies sold into the UK in 2020. So what that essentially says is 94–95% of all the heating technologies sold this year and last year is natural gas. So it's almost an homogeneous solution that we've arrived at in the UK since the introduction of natural gas back in the late 60s, early 70s. And what you can see is we're predicting here now as we move forward over the next 2 decades, certainly by the time we get to 2040, you see a much more diversified technology landscape in the UK than we've historically seen. And that diversification will, in our view, start to emerge around 4 key technologies. So electric heat pumps is one, and within the electrification of heat, we include electric convector heaters, electric boilers, electric water heaters. So the electrification side will be one of the major new technologies to emerge. Hydrogen boilers, so we are working with the government at the moment, looking at the feasibility of repurposing the gas network over to 100% hydrogen, and therefore heating particularly a number of the old Victorian, Georgian, hard-to-heat homes that Jonathan referenced earlier on, connected to the gas network. Can we decarbonise the gas supply to those houses and effectively decarbonise the heating using hydrogen as a fuel? We also believe there's a strong market that will emerge for a hybrid of those technologies. So we have a small heat pump installed into a heating system and hot water system that also features a boiler. The heat pump covers the base load heat requirement of that property. And when we get particularly cold spells, maybe like what we're experiencing right now, and maybe for short hot water requirements, then we use the hydrogen boiler to supply those requirements. And then the fourth technology, which really will be driven to a large extent by the consequences of the Grenfell Tower fire, with particularly in high-rise apartment blocks, we'll see a move towards heat networks as opposed to individual gas boilers or individual heating technology in each apartment. So a much more diversified technology landscape, and therefore moving away from a very homogeneous market dominated by natural gas to a much more diversified portfolio. If you could go to the next slide, please. So one of the key challenges that the government has right now is to encourage homeowners to transition to new heating technologies. And I think Jonathan mentioned we've got one of the oldest housing stock here in Europe, if not the world. We've also got a very high proportion of home ownership that is still predominant here in the UK, which means it's you and I, the homeowner, who has to decide that we are going to switch and decarbonise the heating of our homes. And today, the supply chain for heating in the UK is the left-hand box that I've shown on the screen here. So we as a manufacturer, we actually supply builders merchants or heating and plumbing merchants who then sell to a heating installer who then sells to you and I in our home. So equally, we are not selling technology direct to the consumer. It's going via a 2 or 3 step distribution channel. The phone always rings, doesn't it, when you're in the middle of a speech? And actually, we've got to take that whole supply chain along with us. In the context of the whole digitalization of much of our economy, we have seen in recent, certainly in the last 5 or 6 years, Amazon taking a lot of interest around the heating sector. And we've seen emerge a number of digital companies. Boxed is a very good example, where actually you buy your heating online and they will arrange the design of the system, the specification of the system. They get all of the materials delivered to your property and arrange for a heating and plumbing engineer to come along and install that equipment. So you purchase everything online and then they do all of the organisation. But the part that is taxing a lot of our time and is really interesting from our perspective is what new business models may emerge around the desire to decarbonise our heating system. So if you could go to the next slide, the final slide from me, this is also taking up a lot of our time at the moment, because whether you switch technologies to an electric heat pump, whether you switch to a hydrogen boiler or a hybrid, that's an investment for the homeowner predominantly to make. And in the end, in many cases, that's not a low-cost option. So one of the challenges that is inhibiting the uptake of heat pumps at the moment is their comparative cost to a gas boiler. They are something approaching 3 to 4 times the cost. So a homeowner has got to invest in excess of £10,000 in their heating system to decarbonise it. And quite frankly, heating is boring. You know, you don't find many people going around bragging about their latest new heating installation, be it a boiler or a heat pump or what have you. It's a fairly low interest category until, of course, the minute it goes wrong. So if it goes wrong in today's environment, most people get pretty agitated about it. But what we're looking at is to take that responsibility away from the homeowner and from the consumer And if we as a manufacturer or other groups follow similar sort of lines that the automotive sector has taken, for example, where very few people actually physically own their car anymore, it's bought through some sort of finance arrangement. Is there an opportunity for us to look at heat as a service, HaaS? Is there an opportunity for us or another third party to retain ownership of the heating device? If we move to that type of model, our key interest and key requirement from a technology point of view then is we need to be able to monitor that appliance in the home 24/7. We need to be doing predictive maintenance on that appliance. As Jonathan was saying, we need to have two-way communication with the energy networks, particularly if we're installing some electrified heating technology into that home. We want to be able to push excess renewable energy at certain times to those devices. We want to maybe use those devices to interact with your EV charging. We want a real smart home energy management system that incorporates not only your heating, but also the other electrical devices, maybe some local generation that you're producing yourself. And having 24/7 connectivity with that heating device and two-way communication with that heating device is really essential. And we think that not only will we see a shift in technology in terms of how we decarbonize our heating systems, but we also believe this will initiate changes in technology in terms of how we purchase heat and how we as a heating manufacturer interact with the consumer of the future. So, Linda, Mark, I'll stop there and hand back to you. And hopefully we've generated some interesting questions for us.
Thank you very much, Carl. And as I said, thank you to all our speakers for some connected conversations there and some kind of, should we say, overview from where Mark opened the session and positioned kind of the bigger picture on connectivity. If we could go to the open screen now and get our contributors on screen, Donston, that would be great, so that our audience can actually see the whites of their eyes. So is that okay? Can you put all of the speaker tiles available to our viewers to see? Is that okay? If you can't, we'll carry on with the questions. Interestingly, a lot has kind of been triggered, as you can imagine, on this very, should we say, emotive subject, challenging subject, and a lot of questions directed to Carl in the first instance. So if I may, from Jamie Randall at IASME to Carl, given that over 95% of hydrogen is currently produced from natural gas without carbon capture, and this looks unlikely to change in the medium term, will using hydrogen boilers reduce emissions of CO2 for homeowners versus heat pumps? Can you answer that?
Yeah, have I got an hour to answer that?
Sadly
question?
not, but you have a little while. Yes, I was going to say, if you could give an overview for our audience, just to kind of position this, because as we know, this is a big topic. Big subject.
And yes, joking aside, how we produce hydrogen for its utilisation in the future is a critical part of decarbonising our energy system. So steam methane reformation using natural gas is the most common way we produce hydrogen today. And that is seen very much as a transitionary technology to start to move us towards green hydrogen. So it fills the gap until we start to see investments, not only in the UK, but on a global basis in terms of producing green hydrogen. And that is very much has to be part of that journey that we go on. There is no point in continuing to use fossil fuels to create hydrogen because in the end, we need to assess the carbon credentials and the carbon intensity of all the technologies that we use. So the future has to be green hydrogen produced through an electrolysis process using either solar power or wind power. We believe a global market for green hydrogen will emerge over the coming decades, but blue hydrogen using carbon capture and storage is just a transitionary technology. But then equally, when you talk about heat pumps, we have to apply the same philosophy in terms of assessing the carbon saving credentials of that technology, because electric heat pumps don't generate carbon emissions at point of use. Hydrogen boilers don't create carbon emissions at point of use. But that is then depending on what carbon emissions you generate in generating the electricity in the first place. And again, today we're far from 100% renewable electricity generation in the UK. So we have to take that into account as well, which is why we believe a mixture of different technologies will emerge over the next 10 to 20 years as we decarbonize the supply of that energy that those technologies use.
Okay, thank you, Carl. As you said, thank you for a fairly succinct answer for that big topic. Jonathan, would you like to add anything to that in the kind of context of investment and kind of the examples you've given? Obviously very helpful, but can you kind of add to that in any way?
No, I just support what Carl says. I do generally think it's probably going to be this hybrid model of, it's not just going to be one tech that displaces another. I think the combination of heat pump plus some sort of hydrogen in there is the way forward. Costs are coming down massively as well. I think if you look back 10, 15 years, the cost of wind and solar installations at an infrastructure level weren't necessarily cost prohibitive, but they didn't generate the financial returns that they do today. And the cost and quality coming out of China, for example, on solar, if we start to see that happening in electrolysis, so that the cost of the generation of green hydrogen comes down, and I see that happening, I think it will continue. That being said, there are abatement technologies that we're very interested in, that when you look across the supply chain, for example, if you take the power station in South Wales that powers the steelworks, steel, you can't get away from producing CO2. With cement, you can't because of the chemical process. There's some very hard to abate industries that, we have to start thinking, well, rather than capturing CO2 and burying it and forgetting it, can we turn it into something useful, right? So we've seen things where it's algae farms. Algae love to munch on CO2. They produce very, very high protein-dense materials, which become feedstocks for animal feed, and it gets back into the food chain. So converting waste, what was a pollutant, it's just, can we capture it effectively and then convert it into something of value, is kind of where we also see it. So I think at the home level for heating, if we're producing 2 tons of carbon dioxide, on its own, that's half a ton of pure carbon a year. That's a really difficult challenge. So I think we won't see the continued use of natural gas in the home, but like Carl said, a combination of hydrogen plus heat pump or hybrid systems is definitely going to be the way forward. That being said, with some form of intelligence on the network to predict what is that optimum mix for today, tomorrow, next week, so the supply chains can kind of handle that complexity.
Thank you.
Linda, I was going to jump in there. I was going to ask Carl a question, actually, and say, because it's follow on. Recognising it's going to be a bit of a hybrid going forward, I suppose that the question I have is, it was the slide when you put up about, for the poor consumer out there. How are people going to make choices? Because in the past, you move in, you have gas providers and stuff like that. It seems almost prohibitive, some of the technologies, whereas I think how is the government going to drive this direction? Because it is an interesting one.
It also links, if I may, to a question from Jenny Rode of Innovate Edge, where she said, how well are homeowners able to assess and navigate options? Previously, replacing a boiler was largely replacement by similar. So it's a paradigm shift in culture and kind of the way we're moving. We keep talking about digitization, virtualization, but actually, again, it's a societal mindset as well, isn't it? And that education. And I think a great comment from John Heseltine of Okius Consulting. He said, the positioning of old skills and converting to new digital for adoption is a big challenge here. And we've headlined this talk, global technologies the next 5 years. There's a lot to happen. So again, sorry to jump in, but over back to Carl to respond to you, Mark.
Yeah, and I think what I said earlier on. You know, heating is generally not a high interest category. So suddenly to ask every homeowner in the land to become heating experts and decide what technology they want to have in the future in their home is going to be very, very difficult. So as part of our interfaces with government, we're very much proposing that we need to re-educate and upskill the supply chain that I referenced in one of the slides. You know, the person who retails the heating technology to a homeowner is a small independent heating installer in most cases. There are some big installation companies. And we've got to upskill them, and they've almost got to become home energy assessors rather than heating engineers. And we need to provide them not only with the skills and the knowledge to do that, but the technology to do it as well. And therefore, it's interesting to see the emergence of digital companies like Box, who have taken that whole surveying of the property and the whole design of the heating system online, taking it off the requirement for a physical engineer to visit the property and survey it face to face. So I think a lot of those, there will be multiple strands of technology shift, both in terms of the physical way we generate heat for the home and the way we sell it and the way the business models will emerge. Because in the end, if we can give it to a large organization like ourselves and we have the technology challenge and problem and the consumer is just contracting to buy heat and we take that critical decision away from them, I think that will emerge quite strongly in the next decade or so, because as you said, you can't expect 28 million homeowners in the UK to become energy experts in the next couple of years.
Just feel as though it's disruptive business models going to be the new way of actually addressing heating going forward. And I love your idea of heating as a service.
I was going to be, I mean, I used to think a lot about this actually. I'd be even more provocative and say it's not heating. As consumers, we just want to be warm, comfortable, and cozy. It's almost coziness as a service, right? People just do not understand the concept of a kilowatt hour because it's just not interesting. Right? It's only people like you, Carl, maybe me as a geek, right, who kind of understand that power and the heating bit. But this isn't necessarily about tech. This is about that business model innovation. The technology largely exists. Most people have smart meters. We're edging closer and closer to 10-second reconciliation, which there's no real use case for yet. But the more data we have, the more we're able to predict, analyze, work out the distribution, the outliers, as well as what the midpoint is. Then you can start twisting the business model to do exactly what Carl just said. You know, the coziness, heating, whatever it is as a service, the tech's there to do that. It's an economic business model question for somebody to crack.
And you said it as part of your talk as well, Jonathan, that you then need smart two-way communication with the energy systems and the network so that we can use the energy available. As that energy becomes more and more renewable, the intermittency increases on the networks, and therefore that ability to two-way communicate, have intelligent communications with whatever your EV, your heating system, your PV on your roof, whatever it is, we need to move into the 21st century and really drive a technical revolution around the whole energy management.
And the frustrating thing is you need that digital backbone of connectivity to be able to do any of that, whether it be mobile, wireless, fiber, whatever it needs to be. But at the moment, we haven't got it, and you can't actually address many of the issues unless you've got that connectivity in place.
Thank you. As I said, we're kind of working towards the kind of close of the talk now, but obviously for BetaDen and the BetaDen ecosystem and community, a lot of our small or early stage technology companies are looking for how they evolve their concept or solution and be of interest to larger enterprise supply chains. Any advice from yourself, Mark, in particular, coming from, should we say, a great deal of experience in this background, how we kind of guide more of our Worcestershire early stage technology businesses to get them directed for this global marketplace?
I think a lot of the work you're doing Linda, is already the right things to do. It is actually providing a platform for people to promote and test and show at scale or early stage scale what the capabilities are. I'm working with a number of private equity companies at the moment, and that there is money available and they're looking for opportunities. Now, they're looking for somebody that's already scaled at a level, but there's plenty, Jonathan talked about angel investment, but we should be setting Worcestershire up most definitely as a place where people know that we have innovative companies to come and have a look at. If you look at where the funding goes, predominantly still an awful lot is down in the southeast to a massive level, it's like 90%. We need to take that money out of London and bring it into Worcestershire. We only do that by having bright, clever people who are doing stuff, and we're promoting it on their behalf. If we take Beta-Den to the next level across the county and wider and further as a brand, that knowledge is already there. I'm hearing Beta-Den being mentioned down in London when I'm talking to DCMS. They talk about it because of the work that's been done. We hear it out within, in the health sector. We've got Sajid down there. So I think we're on a roll about it, but again, with the likes of Carl, who's respected and leader in the community. We've got Jonathan, who's got those links into it. I think these are the things that we need to do and promote going out.
Thank you.
Any comment? Just
yeah,
add
Carl.
a quick comment to that, Linda. I think during Mark's talk, he mentioned two key sentences. Whatever technology we're talking about, it needs to solve a problem and deliver a benefit. And those are the absolute two key milestones we have at the forefront of our mind all of the time. What's the problem we're trying to solve, and what is the benefit you deliver to a consumer? And if there's a clear benefit, they'll buy it.
Yeah.
Every time they will buy it.
Yeah. You're right, Carl. Our job there is so many good ideas get lost. Our job is to make sure that those that are addressing that, we promote and get that funding, because we don't want them to disappear anywhere else.
Yeah, I'd just finally to add to that. I mean, I think a lot of people who come in who aren't necessarily that experienced as founders or entrepreneurs raising capital, people tend to focus too much on their solution. Whereas, flippantly, I'd say if you're just going to talk to me about your widget, you haven't got a business, because you don't have a business until you've got somebody who's willing to pay for that solution. So come and tell me about the problem you're solving, right? If that problem is global, there's a material enough market, it's painful enough somebody that they'll happily pay quite handsomely to get that problem solved. Tell me about that. And then once I'm excited about the scale and the magnitude of that pain, then tell me about how you solve it. Don't come and talk about tech. And that, so I think there's, in getting that message across, I think, Linda, there's just as much an education of how you tell your own story about what you're trying to do and the why, and why does it exist, and why does that problem exist, and why is it going to be more acute over time, is a skill a lot of seasoned founders and entrepreneurs have, but it's something you can learn. And we see upwards of 1,000 business plans a year, and we only make 5 investments. So the majority of stuff does not get vested. Right? So you've got to be able to tell your story in an exceptional way that stands out, that's easy for me to understand, when we're not going to be experts in every single tech that comes through our door. So I think, the Beta-Den helping promote how you tell your story as a founder, as an entrepreneur, as a technology business will only help.
Yeah, very good.
Right. Thank you. Well, thank you all. And actually that does, should we say, dovetail neatly into exciting news on Beta-Den Clean Tech Bootcamp, which is coming to market in early January, which we will be delivering in the north of Worcestershire from our Kidderminster base. So hopefully for many of you on the listening end today, be aware that Beta-Den, the accelerator, is one offer, but also there's new offers coming, particularly around the clean tech space. It does appear that we've tracked off in this particular direction, even though we've badged it global tech the next 5 years. But actually, it is quite important, as we're hearing from even the leading light, Indra, our Worcestershire kind of primed business here, and Jonathan's very connected to. But hearing how this is now evolving, and as Mark has quite rightly pointed out, we need to bring the money here and the investment to enable us to have lots of competing global tech companies in 5 years' time, but also the ones there today that need the help. So I think as we're going to wrap, we're very excited to let all of you know that we'll continue the Tech Tuesdays in 2022, starting again in April with topics which include technology shaping the future of fintech, digital twinning, improving efficiencies, Web3, decentralized blockchain. I'm sure some of you, you're pricking your ears up to some of these, and XR, extended reality, and the skills issue, as we're hearing. So we're going to keep on bringing you these very, very deep tech and deep dives in deep tech where we can. But if any of you would like to contribute for any of the speaker opportunities here, please let the BetaDen team know. Thank you to all three contributors today. We do appreciate you giving BetaDen and the wider audience network your time and knowledge. There are many questions, I would stress, Carl, coming in around the hydrogen question, which I'm sure that you have several hours to talk about, but not in this context today. But we'll get those across to you, so that perhaps those people with very specific questions may be able to get some feedback from you on those. We look forward to seeing all of you and many of your network as we continue to grow BetaDen. And finally, it's just for me to wish you all a safe and peaceful Christmas and many exploitable innovation opportunities for the new year. Thank you all very much, and see you next year. Thank you.
Thanks, Linda. See you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.